Welcome to the Wilshire IT Repcast. Today is a special recording. We're wrapping up this beautiful summer across the country, and we're diving right into fall. I'm Evan Martin. I'm the Vice President of Revenue Cycle at ZoomCare, and I'm fired up for today's conversation for sure. I want to introduce my Revenue Cycle partner in crime today, Kelly Samuel. Kelly is the Executive Director at Annuity Health. If you have ever worked with her, you will definitely know that she can look at a messy revenue cycle problem and find immediately spot patterns and look at where we can succeed as a group. She's helped countless organizations improve their cash flow, reduce their denials, and build stronger teams. I've had the pleasure of working with Kelly on former consulting engagements as well. So welcome, Kelly, to the podcast.
Hi, Evan. Thanks so much. I'm super excited to be here. And I have to say, when you called this revenue cycle crime, you definitely weren't kidding. The patterns that we're going to uncover today, they're definitely hiding in plain sight in most organizations, I have to say.
Yeah, I have to fully agree. I think before we dive into that, let me ask you something. When people hear the word patterns, what do you think goes on through their heads for the most part?
Honestly, if you're a revenue cycle person, I think most people are thinking big spreadsheets, pivot tables, their eyes glaze over, right? But patterns, in my opinion, aren't just in data, they're going to be in behavior, workflows, and habits, right? I also feel like the biggest breakthroughs usually come from noticing the consistent things that are inconsistent, right? The exceptions that continue to show up and continue to bleed your margins.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, as we discover today, we want you as listeners, while most of you are revenue cycle or IT experts, we want you to really think about it from a non revenue cycle point of view of how you can explain today's conversation to your clinical counterparts and to your finance and managed care counterparts, because that's really what's going to help target why you're asking them to embark in this journey with you and help provide you some of these data elements. So, okay, we've all you know that patterns drive what we need to spot are those hidden complex data elements, right? But
Mhm.
in reporting, what reports are we already looking at every day or every week that can help us out from your point of view, Kelly?
And so basically, everyone's always chasing like new dashboards or new analytical tools, right? But normally the goal that you find is already in the reports that you already have, right? Definitely reports you've been ignoring. I try to tell teams all the time, like when you're looking at your agent reports or your payer trending or your denial trending, right? Don't just look at the data, but look through it, right? Because like what story is this trend trying to tell you, right? What information can you also get from your end users that'll help you? Not only you're looking at the data to see that trend, but being able to identify that trend and what to do going forward.
So when you start looking at that initial foundation of engaging with a new business partner from your standpoint, because that's what a new for those who don't know what annuity health is, we're not going to get too far into it, but think of them as they offer some consulting services, but it's a lot of extended business office services in that regard. So they are your true partner in multiple balance fronts that are going to be able to dive in and look at it. So they're going to have key questions for you from a business partner perspective versus if you got me from the Wilshire Group, I'm going to be looking at general operations and being looking at, okay, what are those pattern components that aren't going to necessarily affect me as an individual, but are currently affecting you as a long-term team. And annuity does some of the similar, but they're also looking what are they going to be absorbing for their team. So Kelly, as you're thinking of that, as you're engaging with a new client or even a current client that maybe has had some extended leadership changeover or major contract modifications and payer changes, what are some of the what's the number one missing thing that you see most of us revenue cycle leaders missing in our revenue cycle data element?
I think the biggest thing that they do is they chase metrics without meaning, right? And when I say that, like organizations normally get so focused on the number, right? As we talk about all the time as well. AR days, cash rate, right? What's the denial percentage? But I feel like they forget to ask why it's moving, right? Why are those numbers going up? You can't fix, of course, in my opinion, what you don't understand. And I always say trend first, target second, right? So once you trend it, what's going to be your action plan to target the trend that you identified and to help those numbers go into the right direction?
I think that's a great point. Trend first, target second. I do think as you guys hear us talk later on in another segment, we're going to tie all of this back to HFMA map keys because we know as an industry, there's four leading vendors that are going to help establish that. So we look at your EHR platform. Many of us, our listeners, Kelly, listen, are on Epic platforms or even maybe Athena or Meditech. So we know there's internal benchmarkings amongst those solutions for their peer like groups and like sizes. We also are going to tie it back to the national keys of HFMA map keys that a tie for both hospital and professional and look across some of those key metrics together. And then for listeners, you can always be looking at MGMA,
Hmm.
HEMA, other key KPIs for those specialty areas and specialty types of departments. But really, for our conversation, we're always going to try to tie things back to HFMA since those are kind of the leading areas of Kelly's and my natural foundation of our revenue cycle education.
Right.
Um, so as we, are exploring here throughout the day with patterns and developments, um, what what's the one thing that you try to look at, that one data element, and this is not part of something we discussed yet, but like what's that one that you're like, this is my sweet spot, Kelly, as a leader, that I always want to look at first? What's that first one that you go to drive for, that KPI?
Yeah, that first one is going to be my aging, right? I'm looking at my greater than 90, right? Like what seems to be falling into that for into those buckets for the greater than 90? What's driving that, right? Is it a particular payer that's doing it? Is it a denial, like our favorite one, no authorizations? Am I seeing a spike, in that denial? So definitely looking at that aging helps me to identify like what could have happened, right? What went wrong. So that's the first thing I always try to take a look at.
Yeah, and I think it's also looking at that aging cycle of, revenue cycle in general. What's
Mhm.
the amount of time that it took for the charge to post, that charge lag, the coding lag, and then that bill lag? And
Right.
all three of those caused your aging automatically from data service to be, instead of a typical 3 to 5 day bill window, rev cycle window, to a 14 or 15, you're already halfway,
Right.
30, almost 30 days out by the time it actually gets fully accepted and clear. So I
Agreed.
think those are the key elements when you're looking at that 90 to say, hey, I might not need to target the denial right out of the gate. I might need to target operational improvement up
Hmm.
front. And is that causing it, or
That's causing it.
simultaneously looking at both? So as we
Right.
explore more today, I think listeners, think of it beyond just the typical when you're looking at trends, but look at it more holistically. So
Agreed. Totally.
let's ask our listeners this. So as we go throughout this, I think we're going to pose some questions back to all of you listening or watching on YouTube today to really focus in on, here's some key questions for you or key areas that we want you to take away from this. So the first is, if your revenue cycle were a patient, would you wait until they're in a critical condition to check their vital signs, or would you be acting more proactively? Kelly, with that question, I know what you would answer, so we don't need to answer the question. But what are you seeing from an industry trend associated to that question?
So I would say, kind of like basically what you asked earlier, I feel like too many leaders only look at the data when something's wrong, right? It's almost like waiting until your patient codes before you check vitals, right? So I think the healthiest organizations that I work with are the ones that are monitoring daily, right? Monitoring daily, diagnosing early, and then they're making adjustments or pivoting quickly.
Yeah, and I think one of the great, we're not going to do a case study here for all of you guys to hear about that. You can either catch us in November, and if you're listening to this after November 15th, we were in Hawaii speaking of this, and we've done it a few other places. But you can also go out to Annuity's website. We'll post in the link as well that of an article that Kelly and I co-authored together around the power of patterns. But ultimately, what I think it really comes down to is how do you divide your staff to be those metric focused
Correct.
individuals versus you as a holistic leader having to focus in on that. And that's where I think we struggle is we want to see all the metrics at a senior
Right.
level component, but I don't have time in a VP capacity to dive into each of those buckets, nor does the next director or the manager underneath of me or even the supervisor have the bandwidth to manage all of that. So it's about team management of that and team assignment of that management with daily report outs and daily focus trends. If you try to bite off everything at once, and if you are a small revenue cycle organization, our recommendation would be empower your staff. Your staff also are
Exactly.
looking at those trends. And a great example of that is a client that both Kelly and I worked with historically, that they actually have staff members that were collectors that they've now converted into data analysts, that they not only work accounts and try to work those hard accounts in that capacity of a follow-up functionality and processor, but they're also in charge of monitoring that trend on a daily basis and spiking that back to their manager and the director for report out to the VP there. So I think that is one great best practice that's out there in the industry.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Also just to add to that too, like you said, like empowering that end user, right? So at that organization, those analysts also, saying, got the information from the end user as well. Hey, we're seeing this spike. What are you seeing when you're working those denials, when you're working those claims, when you're calling the payer? What are you seeing? That and normally that's where they get the most valid information, right? The most valid data on what that end user is actually seeing once they're working those accounts.
Yeah, I fully agree. Well, we're going to take a quick break, everybody, and we'll be right back.
The No Surprises Act requires hospitals to provide a complete self-pay good faith estimate for all providers involved in a patient's procedure, even if the providers are not owned or managed by the health system. The challenge is how to efficiently request estimates from independent providers, how to hold everyone accountable for their contribution, and how to provide a complete good faith estimate within the 24 to 72 hour delivery requirement. At Collective Health, we believe the solution is an agnostic portal where providers collaborate and share estimates while having visibility and accountability to each other. The Hive GFE Exchange is the industry's only solution that brings together estimates from individual providers into one consolidated GFE. CMS may have delayed enforcement, but is your hospital prepared for a comprehensive GFE? Don't delay. Join the collective. For more information, go to goodfaithestimate.com.
Okay.
And we're back. All right. Well, we've identified 6 critical warning signs that we feel that every organization should be monitoring. And when we mean monitoring, we're not just saying weekly or monthly or quarterly. Kelly's going to help walk us through that, but really it goes back to what she said right before the break. It's about daily monitoring of this and assignment of that monitoring and cross training of that assignment of monitoring. So, Kelly, what are these 6 areas that we got to dive into and really focus in?
Well, of course, number one is going to be your AR agent spikes, right? Particularly in that over 90-day bucket that I was talking about before. So, of course, if you're seeing a sudden increase there for specific payer or a service line, that's your canary in the coal mine, right?
And I think that canary really is key for people to really understand is that 90 is really a trend. And this is where if you have an extended business partner that is doing low dollar balance or even mid to low dollar balance, you really have to lean in on that relationship because they're going to find the errors faster than you're going to find them in your high dollar accounts. And a high
Right.
dollar account, you're going to have so much mixed in there where those key small things that add up dollars quickly in that AR over 90 really is where those business partners and my tenure have really served me best in helping me monitor that. There's a critical question for our listeners that we want you guys to be thinking. Are you looking at your overall aging, or are you breaking it down by payer, service line, and location? And what we mean by that is those patterns are going to vary the different stories depending on how you slice that data. So if I'm looking at my women's health specialty for OBGYN and labor and delivery services, that's going to look vastly different than my general OR. So I'm going to need to do that. And then if you're looking at your OR space, you might need to be looking at it from orthopedics to your orthopedic inpatient. And then even pulling, if you are a holistic health center, pulling in your provider data at the same time and mirroring that up. Because if your providers are getting paid, but you're not getting paid on that technical side, there's a question that we need to be having with our contracting team and our payer team as well.
Right, no, agree. And if I can add to that too, just a little bit, like kind of like to what you were saying, like I think aggregated data can lull you into a false sense of security, right? But once you drill into, like you said, payer, provider, facility, the level, then you'll really see, is it a department or particular specialty that's really holding your money hostage?
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think that lends us to say we're not all ever starting in the same place. And that same place will ebb and flow based off of where we're at within the cycle or where our organization health is in the revenue cycle at that current point. That could be from technology comfort around technology, AI familiarity, or adoption. So, how should someone assess their current readiness to identify the best entry point for AI adoption or even technology adoption to support them with this?
That's actually a great question too. So I would say start small, right? Pick that one process that's repetitive, data heavy, right? Something that your team dreads having to work anyway. And then I think you can use that in pilot automation there. You'll build confidence, in my opinion, and momentum, right? And another thing too, like I feel like AI doesn't have to replace people, of course. And I think a lot of people, when you hear AI, that's the first thing they think, right? Oh no, it's going to replace me. Really, I want people to think of AI too as it should empower them to focus on the more complex human-centered work, right? So again, in my opinion, I would start small. Pick that repetitive task.
Yeah. And, I definitely think if your denial spike 58% in the next month, one question you should like ask yourself this question, right? And it's hypothetical today, but if my denials were to spike 58% in the next month, how quickly would I know about it? And
Hmm.
who would be the first one to notice it? I think that is the key of understanding that in your organization. Who's going to see it first versus you seeing it in a data trend the next quarter or that next element? Um,
Right. Yeah. And I mean, exactly. And if you're waiting until a month in reporting, Evan, it's already too late, right? To me, the strongest teams are going to build like trend triggers, right, into their process, right? Whether you're using your system for like daily alerts, dashboards that you can create, even simple Excel trackers, just to kind of flag some of those anomalies that you're seeing in real time. I feel like that also can kind of help someone when they see in those denials spike, kind of be able to address it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that goes back to why, Kelly, both you and I are very adamant about daily huddles with our frontline
Yes.
staff because even though we might not be seeing it in the numbers yet, they're feeling it in their daily work. And that daily work is the indicator to say, okay, now let's go pull the data to support it. Or they keep writing this issue in their unresolved list or their supervisor escalation or lead escalation reports that they need support on. So I think your data is not always going to come from an AR report. It's not going to come
Mm-mm.
from those typical spots. We have to leverage all of that to be able to be proactive ahead of time.
Right, correct.
So, what are some of those early warning signs? Those I would let's say our number three early warning signs and delay in reimbursement that exceed our contractual terms. Like, what's one that always surprises you every time?
That's a tough one, all right? And I mean, I completely get it. I'm gonna speak for organizations, right? Keeping track of every payer contract, all the different timelines, carve outs, the reimbursements and all of those. It's like most organizations or teams are juggling dozens of them, right? Dozens of payer rules, and those things can easily slip through the cracks, right? So you definitely want to try to leverage your system, right, to be able to help you to identify some of those. I've seen quite a few systems that are actually tracking, you know what I'm saying, the days between when that payer accepted that claim and to the payment, right? So a lot of times taking those payers that you have, especially your top ones, and trending some of that data, right? Using your system to help you identify, hey, wait, why is it taking, this payer so long to pay me when normally they pay me within, 30 to 45 days, and now I'm seeing it's like 68 to 95 days. Maybe those are the payers I need to reach out to, look at my contract, because they say they're supposed to pay a clean claim within those 60 days, right? Using that type of reporting to leverage, getting with your provider relation reps and kind of seeing what's going on.
Yeah, I think it also goes back to knowing when you're not in contract doesn't mean that you have to abide by those rules because you're already out of network and you're just doing the
Right.
patient a courtesy of billing their insurance coverage because they might have an out of network benefit. So if you have the instance where a health plan is constantly requesting you records and you're not in network, that doesn't mean that your managed care contracting team's not having a conversation with them about a future state getting in network. So they can, you can even leverage that to say, hey, why are you requesting this information? I have that going on right now. Is I have a health plan that I'm in network for part of my services and I'm out of network for the other, and they're requesting 100% pull on my out of
Oh, wow.
network portion, and I'm like, no, I'm not giving this to
Oh,
you. Either pay the contract or within 60 days I'm dropping it to the patient because
right.
I'm not in network with you. And that's the part then the patient, I'm having to leverage that relationship with the patient to say your health plan's not paying the claim timely and we notified you at point of service that you're out of network and would be responsible for it. So we do have to have that delicateness of we're here to service our patients and serve our patients and support them. But at the same time, we need to hold our that accountability back. So really knowing that language or even baking in that language. I've seen some great health systems on the West Coast and even the East Coast now put in language that says you have to process our claim regardless if you want information or not within the first 30 to 45 days. And then you can do
Right.
a retro review, but you're not allowed to do a pre review. Um,
Right.
and you can do take back and all of that and whatever it may be, but you're going to pay that claim up front based off what it is and then run it through your system after the fact. And if they're not adhering to that in your language, that's when I have seen more and more health systems go to arbitration or full contract termination with plans now because of that element of divide that's going on.
No, yeah, absolutely. I've seen more and more organizations that I work with doing that as well.
All right, let's do a quick exercise, Kelly.
Okay.
I want everyone listening to think about their most recent revenue cycle report. Here's the question. Of these 6 warning signs, which one is your organization monitoring closely? And we didn't call out each individual 6, but we've talked about them. So we've talked about AR over 90. We've talked about cash in the door in general. We've talked about denial spikes. We've talked about contract management and monitoring contract language. What are the other 2 that we've talked about? I know they're there.
The DFMB that you mentioned
DNFB
earlier, and then adjustments.
and then our adjustment cycle. Yep,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. So in those 6, what is the one you're monitoring the closely and which one are you not monitoring at all?
And I know that's a question for the individuals out there too, but I just want to say, like, be honest with yourself, right? Because the report that you're probably not watching, that's probably where your next crisis is hiding, right? That's going to be where you need to make sure that you are going to that report and pulling those trends and being on top of it.
Yeah, and I think and just to clarify, when you say that, Kelly, are you thinking when you're saying you're saying your organization and
Yes.
as the senior leader, if you're a senior leader listening, it's you assigning that or having somebody self-assign that versus them personally having to.
Correct. Absolutely. Definitely. Like, again, like we've talked about it before, like, use your management team, your analyst, your end users, like use your teams to be able to dive into that data for you because they're going to be the ones that are going to get you the answers you need, the accurate answer that you need back.
Yeah. I think, and when we say dive into the data, it's beyond your guys' platform too. It's also going out into those payer portals and looking for
Yes.
trends. I'll give you a prime example. One of my team members kept noticing, like, hey, every time I'm following up on a complex appeal that I submitted, I'm seeing this huge list of release of information requests from this health plan for missing or needing more information. And that's part of our extended business office team's functional duty, but it was a large backlog. And instead
Right.
of telling us right out of the gate, that employee self-serviced and went in and pulled all of that and processed like 52 records, which is
Oh,
amazing. And
wow.
I'm
That's
happy for them doing
amazing.
that.
Yeah.
But if they didn't tell us in their weekly
Right.
report out with their manager and their one-on-one, we would have never known that we had a
Right.
problem with our EBO, right? To be able to go back and say, hey, what was causing the delay? And ultimately, what was causing the delay is the health plan was rejecting them because of the individual's login credentials at the EBO had expired. So they've been trying to circle like who were to grant them access versus just saying, hey, can you reset our password? So there's little things like that on trends that you would never know. But
Yep.
all of those were getting past timely submission of their request for information. So then we ended up having to appeal them all. So we were causing ourselves more effective work without somebody going in and seeing that trend or being able to identify it. So even if they're identifying it, empower your teams to be, since
Exactly.
they're at the place, to go ahead and make the correction and then bring that solution. I take it from one of my mentors, and I know Kelly,
Oh, yeah.
I push this at our
Yes.
the clients we've partnered with is don't come knocking if you don't have a solution or a
Correct.
recommendation for a solution, because I can give you what it is, but I'm not at the forefront and I don't actually know your workflow to say, is this going to work or not? I can give you ideas and recommendations, but I want an initial recommendation to me. And I think that's how we empower our staff to own our revenue and feel like they're an owner of your department.
All right, and I love that. I know we're going to talk about it more, but empowering teams is so important, right? Especially with the topics that we're talking about, like just empowering them, then they, to what you said, they feel like they have ownership of that revenue as well, right? It's not just the organization's revenue at that point, it's theirs also. Everyone can feel like their own small little business owner, right? Once we empower them with the tools needed.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, right, we can't determine what are those early equations for cash flow. We can't fix it without them consistently having a voice at the table.
Right.
And however your organization does that, I'm a proponent of 15-minute huddles every morning,
Me
re-level
too.
set what the workload is, hear what they were seeing yesterday. Sometimes those 15 minutes are only 5, and sometimes it's 35, and you allow for that flexibility,
Right.
but it really does modify how we approach it and move things forward. And then I'm a huge, I know we live in a virtual world. Most
Mhm.
of us do. There's very few rev cycle offices that still have 100% of their team going in. I do think that it's about how do you do virtual one-on-one huddles with your team as
Correct.
well. Have, it's funny. We use Slack here at Zoom. I have a Slack channel. I know at my old organization, we had a Teams channel where people could bring up trends and issues live real time, and
Yep.
leadership is responsible for going back through that on a daily basis and seeing what were the hot topics people helped resolve with each other. Is there something we need to be trending with that health plan, or is there something that we need to just do better education on it with our team? So I think those are early detection signs as well, and equate to it. Okay, we are getting closer to our final break here. So before we go there, we wanted to talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in the revenue cycle, and we have been talking about it. Really
Hmm.
is empowering that team in the long wins. Kelly, what have you? Let me rephrase this. Can you have all the right KPIs and tools if your team doesn't feel that they have ownership and accountability?
Look, you already know my answer to that. Absolutely not. No way, right? There are 5 key principles here, right? First, like we're going to talk about data transparency equals team accountability, right? You don't want to hide performance data. Share it, right? That's kind of been like our theme throughout this, right? Make sure you're sharing the data. When your end users see how their work impacts outcomes, they'll step up.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think it doesn't have to be at the end user level yet. If your organization's not at that level of transparency, or I even know some union contracts don't allow for that, doesn't mean that
Mhm.
you can't have it at the global impact and being able to say, here's what that HFMA map key is. We told
Right,
you we're going to bring it back. Here's where the 20, here's the top, here's the middle of the road, and here's where we're at. Right. And if
right,
our true north is always cash is king and AR's days are low, those drivers and patient satisfaction is high. Those three drivers for us in those map keys are going to help us target that and help your leaders and your staff fluctuate or be able to identify those trends.
right. Absolutely. Definitely.
What is the second principle?
The second principle is building governance, right? So you, like we talked about already, you need regular meetings, those daily huddles, clear ownership of the metrics, right? And definitely escalation paths when things go off track, right? Who do they escalate those things to? So that's very important also.
Yeah. And I think governance does not mean bureaucracy. Like it does not have to be, we have to have a formal component of people knowing what are the steps to get communication. But that's not to say, oh, my supervisor wasn't here today. I couldn't go to my manager, my director, or my VP. It's knowing that these are the key placeholders and elements and that we're all one team, one rev cycle. So you can fluctuate up and down, but we want you to have that flexibility and invite that flexibility within your organization as well. Um, without that flow of free flowing governance, what would you get out of it? Like that's what you should be really asking yourself. I mean,
Right.
Kelly, for the organizations you haven't seen have a governance structure, what what's one of the biggest like positive but also negative outcomes that you've seen between both of those?
So definitely you're going to have, to the first question you asked, you're definitely going to have chaos disguised as effort, right? So everyone's working hard on the team, right? But no one's rowing in the right direction, right? So it's very important that you bring those elements together and make sure everyone has a set action plan. I know you love action plans. A set action plan, right? That everyone's on the same page and they understand the direction that you want to go so that everyone is rowing in the right direction, right? And you have those positive outcomes.
Right. And I think you highlighted that. Like I love an action plan, but that action
Me
plan does
too.
not equal govern it, that equals who's responsible for
Right,
ownership of it and that, but that doesn't mean that staff aren't allowed to add to that action plan themselves and
correct.
say, hey, we've identified this as a problem. I want to run with it. It's just making sure we know who it is. And I believe every action plan should have a RACI as well, so that you know who's responsible, who's
Oh,
accountable,
yes.
who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. Without those elements, we really are doing our full cycle a disjustice. So you have to think beyond your department. You have to really think about the broader structure. And that's where we talk about bringing in those clinical counterparts, IS counterparts, all of those people who are actually touching things that are going to impact you downstream. How do you help get them into those elements? The rev cycle doesn't just, they call it the cycle because it starts with
Right.
patient intake, but it's all the way through
Absolutely.
the provider documentation through that bad debt process. So that third principle is really celebrating progress. And I don't think we do enough of this. I think
I
we
agree.
work thankless. Rev cycle can work very thankless jobs and feel thankless or the redheaded stepchildren because we're often just dealing with denials, frustrated patients, fighting deadlines, having to fight the good fight, explain the answers. But the queen of celebration is on this podcast. So, Kelly, what
Right.
are ways that you have seen organizations not monetary celebrate, but even both monetary and non monetary?
Oh yeah, that's my thing, right? Like I feel like recognition is like a rocket fuel, right? A simple shout out in a meeting, like the daily huddles we were talking about, right? Or even a leaderboard email, right? Where you're basically, shouting out that individual. Like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be the end user, anyone, right? That maybe they gave a process improvement idea or they identified a big trend that helped the organization recover millions, right? So that's definitely where you want to make sure you're recognizing individuals' efforts because again, like I said, it can change morale overnight. And it also reminds people that their hard work matters, right? I think, like you said earlier, in revenue cycle, that can be forgotten a lot of times, right? Because
Right.
we're like always busy on the go, right? But like also make sure you're, recognizing that hard work that individuals are doing.
Our fourth principle really is surfacing barriers. Your front, we're gonna keep hounding this, and it's probably because we both are lean driven and Six Sigma driven. Going to the frontline staff, they know what's happening, what's broken. They also have ways of recommending change. They might not know it's like I said earlier, don't come to me with unless you have a solution. They might not have a full baked solution, but that's a solution.
Right.
And our job is to help them finish baking it and then letting them run with it versus us taking it and running with it for them. If we empower them reversely, they're going to continue to bring that forward to the forefront for you.
Right. No, agreed. And I just want to say 100% because normally the people closest to the work usually know the fix, right? We as leaders just have to make sure we're listening, making sure we're listening to that fix. One thing I want to just bring up too is like making sure we're creating a safe space, right, for feedback also, right? And actually acting on it. I feel like nothing kills engagement faster than ignored insight, right? And even if it's something we can't get to right now, just acknowledging like, hey, we appreciate that feedback. We're definitely going to talk about that in our next dashboard call. Something like that goes a long way.
Yeah. And then circling back with them and saying, hey,
Yeah.
part of our job is to say, oh, yeah, we talked about that. Here's questions that we're going to propose to you to go back and tell us how would this work or what are we missing in the barriers. I mean, equally, we always look at what is the solution our staff have brought to us as what are the things that or gaps that they might be missing, but we need to
Yep.
do the same back to them. And that's where we get
Correct.
that partnership in that growth. Our
Agreed.
fifth principle, which I think is the most crucial principle, and we forget to do it. And Kelly, I'd love your thoughts on this, is
Okay.
we have to honor the past while celebrating the future. And what I mean by that is we've implemented change, we've implemented tools, we've implemented processes that weren't wrong for when we did it, but doesn't mean that it can't evolve and that we need it to evolve. So if we don't honor that as a group, we don't provide that closure. And for listeners, you might not know what Modelnetics is, but this is one of those
Hello,
foundations of Modelnetics that both Kelly and I I'm in the process taking. Kelly has taken it and
Yep,
been
I
certified
love
in
it.
it. But I mean, Kelly, what are your thoughts on like how do you help with that fine line of celebration and still moving forward?
Right. So this one's actually really close to my heart, right? I mean, I could talk about it forever, give tons of examples, but I just want to say, like, change doesn't mean the old way was wrong, right? You always hear, like, but that's how we used to do it, But change doesn't mean the old way was wrong. It just means as an organization, we've evolved, right? Like, we found maybe a better process or a different way to do it better. And I think to what you were saying too, like, honor what you did to get here, right? And then rally your team around what's next. In my opinion, that's how you build loyalty and momentum as well, right? Making sure, hey, yes, we did do this, right? Not that that was wrong, but hey, we can do this now. Either maybe you implemented a new system, a new process, a new workflow, and let's do this now, and you'll see even better outcomes.
All right. Any final thoughts before we run out to our next break?
No, I think that's it.
All right. We'll be right back.
There are thousands of medical offices and facilities across America, each navigating through changing regulations and reimbursement models while striving for positive patient experiences and outcomes. A common element in each of these facilities is patient access, the front line of both the revenue cycle and the patient experience. Though diverse in facility size and geography, patient access professionals unite around a common purpose, enhancing the overall patient experience to increase patient satisfaction and outcomes. Through it all, one organization is there to educate, connect, inform, and pave the way toward the future of patient access. The National Association of Healthcare Access Management recognizes the changing role of patient access professionals and their increased importance.
All right, and we're back. Okay, Kelly, we are ready to wrap up. But before we do that, we have some homework for our listeners. Yes, I said homework. And the reason for this is we really feel like we ask ourselves this every night before we go to bed. And it really will help you by answering these three questions that I'm going to let Kelly ask you. I think what it's really going to help you do is step back and think about where do you need to restart next week, or at your next leadership team meeting with your rev cycle team, to move the needle and figure out, are they being heard or not heard?
Right. All right, so question one to ask yourself is, what do we track? So my suggestion would be to make a list of every metric you currently monitor in your rev cycle. How often is it reviewed? And who's responsible for taking action? I know we talked a little bit about action plans earlier. And look, we definitely have a template we could share with individuals. But making sure that you're tracking that and who's responsible for taking those actions.
Yeah, I'll still question two from you.
Okay.
What does your team see? Do your frontline teams have visibility into the data that matters to their work by individual groups and also the global of the full revenue cycle? And if not, what can you change to make it more visible? And how does that visibility get to them on a daily or a weekly basis? And what frequency do you think they want to see it at? My little recommendation there is, I can tell you my team, when I first started, didn't have full visibility into the data, and they're not quite there yet to want to see it on a weekly basis or even a daily basis. But we just started off monthly. And after we had a full quarter of data that we could share with them, we've been able to provide that. And now we're down to, okay, now how do we weekly look at it? And then those leaders who are responsible for it daily, how are they daily looking at that? And now how are they bringing that data slices through different daily means versus maybe it being on a full dashboard or a metric tracker?
Agreed. And so question number 3, what can your teams act on, right? And just if I can add, so you might be swimming in data, but none of it drives action, right? It's just noise. So you need to simplify, prioritize, and empower your teams to move the needle. That's how you're going to get the best results.
So, Kelly, with that, I have some non-questions for the audience that I did not prep you for. So, as a senior revenue cycle leader, and you've been doing this for many years, what is the one thing you would tell your younger self in a leadership role, or just starting off, as your piece of advice to yourself?
Oh, that's a good one, Evan. I would tell my younger self to listen, right? To listen to others, like we talked about, like listen to your frontline staff, listen to your peers, listen to your end users, right? Like, and take more of that feedback and suggestions. I think I do that pretty well now, right? But my younger self, is like, oh, I can do this. I'm going to dive into this, and just taking on all of that without maybe taking a step back and listening, right, to others, and like, hey, like maybe this is a bigger issue over here, right? So I would definitely, listen more, right? And take action on the advice that maybe others had or what they were seeing.
What drove you to get into healthcare?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's a funny story because I went to school. I wanted to be a doctor, right? Pre-med biology. And they brought a speaker that was supposed to, motivate us to really want to be physicians, right? To be a doctor, surgeon, whatever. Well, after this motivational speech, none of us felt motivated just because he's talking about the long hours, he didn't eat, the debt, and all of those things. So I decided, maybe I want to go more on the finance side of revenue cycle. I knew I still wanted to stay in healthcare, but maybe I'll go more in that direction, right? So still majored in biology. However, my first job was working for Medicare, right? And so that's really how I became to love this, like being in that role, just talking to providers, processing claims. I even got to work some with OIG and do audits. Like I realized like this is where I want to be, right? This is what I want to do. And so it just kind of evolved to where I'm at now. I was on the other side, on the provider side, and now I'm on the revenue cycle management side. And again, I love it on this side just because I get to go into so many organizations, right? And be able to help them with process improvement ideas and just being a part of the team, right? I can't speak enough to how much I love that and how fulfilling it is just to be a part of all these different teams and being able to see the change, right? And the growth. Or if I do suggest something and they implement that and seeing it work just excites me so much.
I would say the one thing that I learned in my almost it was almost a full year working side by side with you, right? So
Yeah, it was.
but I would say the one thing I've learned is as leaders, we have to do a better job of when do we roll up our sleeves and do the work versus
Mhm.
when do we lean in on our teams who are those experts. And I watched many nights where we both rolled up our sleeves to work alongside the staff, but at
Right.
the same time, I've also seen us say, you know what, I'm going to step back on this one and let my team run with it because it's an opportunity for them to grow. And even if we don't succeed in this one, the benefit is the growth versus the risk of not getting that claim paid. So I definitely think those are the options that we as leaders have to constantly step back and look at as well.
Oh yeah, I completely agree for sure.
So
You
on
can't say
the
it better.
power of patterns, what's your final thoughts?
All right, so if I had to say anything on that, since we've been talking about, identifying trends most of the night, I'd say that trends definitely tell stories, right? But only if you listen, right? The thing I would tell my younger self. In my opinion, the most successful organizations aren't the ones with the necessarily the fanciest dashboards, right? They're the ones with curiosity, discipline, and the courage to act on what that data represents, right? What that data is showing. I think when you build that kind of culture in your organization, every trend becomes a chance to improve, right? Not just a threat to survive.
Yeah. I mean, I quickly I'll reflect on a quick story before we wrap up here. I was
Awesome.
doing an open office hours last week with some staff and they said that they felt underutilized and my response back to them was what does utilization look to you to make you have job satisfaction but also to feel like we're using your full skill set.
That's a great question.
And I don't think as leaders we ask that question enough of what keeps you up as night to our frontline staff. What do you want to see a difference of? What do you want that change to look like? But then be prepared to ask them back that question of, well, what does that actually look like to you? Because we hear a lot in our employee satisfaction surveys, I don't feel heard, I don't feel supported, I don't have this. And as leaders, that can make us have equal fatigue as our employees have fatigue. But what we have to really ask is, what does that look like for each of you individually? And when I posed that question, one of the employees actually responded in my open office hours, and their peer said, but that's not what it looks like for me. And I said, exactly. So
Hmm.
you have to tell me, you have to tell your manager individually, you have to tell this manager individually what that looks like for you so we can value those skills. And then what you guys also have to remember is you might be leveraged for a project that way or for something that we're working on, but these other tasks are also part of that foundation and it's not always there. So it's bringing those foundational three questions back and
Right.
having your staff ask those questions of themselves, I think is opportunity within itself.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree.
All right. Well, Kelly, thanks for joining me on this quick little podcast that we did. How can listeners learn how they can reach you, learn more about annuity, or if they want you to have you come speak to their association, local chapter, or even about adoption or other topics that might populate?
So you can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Kelly Samuel. My email address is ksamuel@annuityhealth.com. You can also find out more about me and the services that we provide if you go to our website at annuityhealth.com. And I just want to throw out that I love collaborating, speaking and brainstorming with teams who want to transform the revenue cycle. One trend at a time, right?
Absolutely. All right, everybody. That's it for us today. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
If you liked today's episode, continue to join Wilshire Wednesdays. You can follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter at Evan_Wilshire, on Facebook at The Wilshire Group, or on Instagram at Wilshire IT Revcast. Remember, if you prefer to watch, come check us out at the Wilshire IT Revcast YouTube channel. If you have an inquiry, want to share your thoughts, or get additional information on today's episode, email us at wilshirePodcast@thewilshiregroup.net. The best way to support this podcast is to review, rate, and subscribe. The Wilshire IT Revcast is hosted, produced, and engineered by Evan Martin. It is executive produced by Gretchen Case, Hank Smither, and Spencer Thielman. The Wilshire Group. Experience you can trust, results you can count on.